Tato. Hello everyone out there in showy Ovaries Town. Welcome in and haere mai to this podcast where I, precariously poised on the precipice of perimenopause, Penny Ashton, seek to find out as much as I can about the magical mystery tour called menopause before I'm sliding down its slippery slopes. A quick reminder, I am not a doctor. I did get a certificate in first aid from the Red Cross in 1990, but I think that might be slightly out of date now. So please do seek an actual medical doctor's advice before embarking on any sort of treatments, etc. My guest today, though, is a doctor. She is extremely fancy, with a master's in philosophy management and employment relations, and also a PhD in Maori entrepreneurship. She's an associate professor at AUT, was the head auntie on Maori TV's Ask an Auntie, and so much more besides that I will attempt to cover a little later on. But first of all, please stop what you're doing and give a round of applause from wherever you're listening to welcome Dr. Ella Henry. Hooray! Kia ora, tēnā koe, hello.
Kia ora, ngā mihi. Thank you for the very grand introduction.
I've got so much more grandness coming because you're a very grand lady.
I think not.
Oh, I think so. So now, how is lockdown going for you?
Well, this is the second lockdown, so it's different from 2020, which I really felt like New Zealand was a team of 5 million and we hunkered down and we were like, as I said at the time, my mother was born in 1919, so she survived the depression. In fact, she said to me afterwards, they didn't even know in the far north it was a depression, it was just normal.
Oh, wow.
She survived the Second World War. My father was born in 1910. He survived the first epidemic.
Yeah.
So I got a tiny, tiny sense of what my parents had survived. And they still had a sense of humour. So I had absolutely no right to lose my sense of humour last year because we were all in it together and it was amazing. And we all got closer together, I think, as a nation. And that was reflected in how we voted and how we thought and what was in the media. Cut to 2021, and I think this one has been different on so many levels. And so for me, I'm part of a very privileged community of people. I have a secure job. I have a steady income.
I'm jealous.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
I have 3 daughters who work in the film industry, so I know how perilous it became for them over the last 2 years. All of their work dried up. So I'm lucky. I own my privilege to have that choice of great working conditions. I don't have data poverty. I have lots of resources. I am lucky. And this year, my eldest daughter and her partner in lockdown had our first grandchild.
Oh, wow. Oh, I knew that you were wanting that. I read that somewhere. So yay.
For a very long time. This is all about me, okay?
Well, yes.
It's all about me. I got my grandson out of the second lockdown. So as far as I'm concerned, this has been the best lockdown ever.
Have you met him?
I got to be living with them, and
great.
we all live together in a multi-generational household. Everybody's dream. I get to spend quality time with him. I've watched him every day of his life for 4 weeks and 2 days and 8 hours, but who's counting?
Lovely.
And so, as I said, I am very fortunate, but I'm also aware that this second lockdown has been so much harder on so many people, and I think that's reflected in the rise in protest, the rise in crime, the rise in violence, all of those things that show a society that's in a perilous state.
Yeah.
And I worry, because I'm from the far north, about how many of my community up there, it's all very well and good saying that they're not as well vaccinated, but I've got people who live in bays that don't have electricity.
Wow.
They have to drive 20 kilometres to get to the nearest shop.
Right.
So they're not leaving their bays and their poverty. So, of course, unless the vaccination and the doctors and the health can come to them, they don't have a vested interest in getting out into the world, but then they're not tested, and when they do go out now, they're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And this is probably not just the far north. This is isolated communities all over the country.
Yep.
So we're kind of pointing fingers at each other. Why aren't you vaccinated? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Without understanding the really perilous, fraught situation that many of our families and communities are in. So I'm very mindful when I talk about how wonderful this year has been for me.
Yeah.
That it is because of these extraordinary events that have been really wonderful for me to live through. But I know that I'm living through also a very traumatic time, not just for my family, but for my country.
Yep.
And let's be clear, for the planet.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think that's the thing. As soon as there's danger, then you just get this anger. And yes, we conquered it all together last year, but this year we haven't managed it. So now it's whose fault is it and everything else. And, it's all the government's fault when it's not. I just think everyone wants someone to blame, and they're sometimes there just isn't, but they'll find
No.
someone.
But you will find somebody. I mean, I remember maybe it was, just over a year ago that we were all collecting mugs with the Director General of Health's photo on.
Dr. Ashley.
And he was like a sex symbol. And now, people are buying pitchforks when they talk about him.
Yeah, voodoo dolls. Yeah.
Yeah, and he has not changed his stance one iota.
Yeah.
But the world has changed, and it's become so much more frightening and so much more unknown, and the unknown is the scariest place to be.
Yeah. I mean, because I'm someone that has no work forever, and I'm just really aware of the privilege that I have. That means that I'm in a nice house. I have a supportive husband. I have good parents who are supportive of me, which not everybody has. You almost feel unqualified to complain, but yet I have no work, but I'm fine. I will be fine. So I just feel for the vulnerable people and also the people that have got a healthy distrust of the government for various reasons, and everyone's just fighting. So yeah, it is a lot right now.
I'm getting a tiny sense of what as I started this discussion talking about what my mother and my father survived, who if they were alive now and then long gone, I'm just getting a tiny sense of some of the things that they survived, and they still had a sense of humor when they were my age.
Yeah.
So that's the best I can hope for, is that I can keep my sense of humour.
Absolutely.
Through the worst and darkest of times.
I know when you think about what they lived through, like this is full on, it's hard, but it's not going off to war. And the government's just trying to keep everyone alive at a fundamental level. And that's the thing that I'm finding so frustrating.
Yeah, my dad went to the second war. His uncles went to the first war. A couple didn't come back, I mean, I haven't had to lose brothers.
No.
And cousins, although I know families in this country that have.
Yeah.
Lots of them, particularly amongst the migrant and refugee community, have escaped horrors that I couldn't even begin to imagine. So, like I said, I'm a baby boomer that had a good life. Mm-hmm. I have a responsibility to be as supportive as I can of those other people that are not having the best time possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, and how is it being a lecturer in these times? Like, what's the logistics like of teaching?
Well, yes, it's been hard. We've had to, there are all these words. We've had to pivot. I had to learn how to use all this new software, and I could bitch about it, but the reality is I've got a job I love,
Fantastic. Great.
And I've had classes of young folks. I mean, I had a student last year who was late getting an assignment, and then he said, I'm sorry, I was at the police station. I got arrested because in the middle of the night I've been going to the McDonald's down the road to use the free Wi-Fi because they haven't turned off their Wi-Fi because I don't have enough money to pay for credit on my phone, and the university was sending out these big files. Just watch this video and download this PowerPoint presentation. And he'd lost his job.
Right.
He had no money coming in. And he was sneaking out of his flat in the middle of the night to go walk down to the local McDonald's because they kept their Wi-Fi on.
Right.
I mean, he got let out, and the police said, you can use our free Wi-Fi, apparently, at the police station and finish your homework. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, these were my students who were prepared to go through this sort of trauma just to get their degrees out of their way. So the extra work I had to do to pivot was nothing.
Right.
To what they've had to do to maintain their education, to maintain their studies, to keep their motivation up. So anything I can do, if it meant I'd dress up like a banana and sing and dance to keep them entertained, I'm all good with that, honey.
Is that on the internet somewhere that we can watch?
No, it's an instant delete on WhatsApp.
Well, yeah, I wish I had some lecturers like you. I had some very dry lecturers at university, and I think that would make such a difference. Like my Shakespeare lecturer, oh my God, I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? I had no idea. So anyway.
I mean, as you can see, I love humor, and I love this thing I read once where, people may not remember what you say, but they'll remember how you make them feel.
Yes, yes.
And I figure I can get people more engaged in the subjects I teach if we're enjoying each other's company.
And you know what? That's why I asked you to do this too, because we've both done social commentary on Radio New Zealand and breakfast television. And I always remember watching you just being highly entertained. That's it. I was like, she's funny. I want to get her on. She'd be a fantastic lady to talk about her bits. because we would have a good time. And I absolutely remember that. So I think that would be very satisfying for
thank
students.
you. You ask about teaching. It's been great for me, but I also understand it's been really hard on a number of my students. So we've had to put a lot of extra work into providing pastoral care, making sure that we have adequate resources. I'm very proud of the fact that AUT delivered 1,400 computers last year, laptops to people who were facing those kinds. That young man that I talked about, we got him a computer. We got him an internet package.
Wow.
We couldn't get him a job, but he could finish his degree with us. And those are the kinds of things that I need to feel a sense of pride in what I do, and I'm very proud of the organisation I work for and how it's stepped up.
Fantastic.
Very short notice,
Yeah, absolutely. Fabulous. Right. Well, now that we've been saying how wonderful you are, I shall say it some more. Honestly, I keep inviting very impressive women, etc., on to talk about this. And then I have to summarize your immense achievements and squish your mana down into, a couple of paragraphs. And I find that quite hard. So I'd also like to thank a tangata for this following source material. Dr. Ella Henry's lineage is Ngātikahu ki Whangaroa, Ngāti Kuri and Te Rārawa iwi affiliations. She was born in Kaitaia Hospital and stayed in the far north till she was 6 when her family, and I quote, packed up the truck like the Beverly Hillbillies and moved to New Lynn in Auckland. Education wasn't initially a passion, and in 1969 she was kicked out of Kelston Girls High School at age 15. From there, she bummed around New Zealand and the world, travelling, learning, and experiencing all she could before coming home again in 1984. This is when her political life and activism kicked in, starting at Greenpeace and then realising maybe she needed some qualifications. She started at Auckland University. She was excited to be at university when an upswell in Maori activism was starting, and once she learned more about the history of her people's colonisation, about the brutalities of the past, and how the notion of racial harmony that was being sold to them at the time was, and I quote, a crock of shit, she was determined to make changes. She's been a treaty negotiator, has advised the government on shaping Maori media, been actively involved in the Maori screen industry, and in 2020 was appointed inaugural director of Maori advancement at AUT's business school. Whew. Now, I still left out quite a lot there, but I'm not Peter Jackson, so I like to keep it a bit snappy. So thanks again, and welcome to Ella Henry. Hooray.
Oh, that sounds very grandiose, and I'm very humbled that you took the time to repeat that.
Oh, no, absolutely. Like, do you ever sit back? This is another question I've started to ask that I enjoy. Do you ever just sit back and go, yeah, man, I did all of that. That was me. I've done that.
It's such an interesting thing to, I only realised I had a career at 50. Before that, I was just grateful that people gave me jobs.
Yeah, right.
I mean, in 1969, when I left school, my first job was because my mum worked at the potteries and my dad worked at the tanneries in New Lynn.
Aha.
So their aspirations for me were, and leaving school at 15 was not as catastrophic as it is now, because my dad left school at 12 because school finished at 12 in the north.
Oh, wow.
Standard 6, if you didn't have a horse to ride to the nearest town, the local native schools stopped at standard 6, and Mum made it all the way to 14. So, but they were both really smart. They just weren't highly formally educated. So they inculcated in me, Mum did anyway, taught me to read before I went to school, So I knew that I wanted to learn from a very early age, but I wasn't very well equipped to deal with the formal educational system. I was a little shit. I mean, I deserved to be kicked out. It was my third suspension halfway through the fourth form.
What did you do?
Okay, well, for the third and final thing,
yeah,
and let's be clear, there was some alcohol involved.
Okay,
we decided to go around the school, some friends and I, and undo all the screws on a bunch of cupboards and doors, and put the screws in a bottle, which back then, you can't even buy it anymore, but there was an alcohol called screwdriver.
Right. Vodka and orange.
I don't know. But we put the screws in there and we left it outside the principal's office. So we got dogged in, and that was the final straw. But 3 months before that, I had been suspended because this is back in the 60s, where they used to have concerts on the weekend in Albert Park. And this was my rocky road to ruin. I went to one of those and I started meeting all these hippies and smoking dope and being really cool and listening to rock and roll in Albert Park. And Bill Lee and Tim Shadbolt had started called Yippies, right? So they was youth in politics, Yippies. And they were giving out this thing called the Youth Manifesto in Albert Park, hand-printed psycho style back in the old days. It was a manifesto for youth, and every line started with fuck. Fuck your petty mentality. Fuck your bourgeois materialism. Fuck your adherence to the rules and the principles of right-wing thinking. Fuck you all. And I was giving these out at school.
Oh, right. Good.
Got busted. And that combined with the screwdriver incident was enough. I was a done deal. I was out the door and I was old enough to be kicked out. So anyway, long story short, I was a bit of a rebel even then without even understanding. And it's only really been in the last maybe 30 years that I've reflected on my life and seen how the decisions I made as a young person were a reflection of the world I lived in.
Mm-hmm.
Where the stereotypes about Maori, and particularly Maori women in the 1960s, were very firmly set. We were either godly housewives, mothers of the nation, or painted harlots at the local hotel. There was nowhere in between. And
the virgin whore dichotomy is strong, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, there was an Australian feminist who wrote a fabulous book called Damned Whores and God's Police, because it was true in Australia as well. There were only two roles for women to play in colonial society. You were either a damned whore, God's police.
Mm-hmm.
And in and Maori women particularly were stereotyped like that. Anyway, so I guess I was regaling against that and against being taken from my home in the north, where I've said this publicly, so I'm not shy about it. But I mean, until I went to school, I'd never met a white person.
Yeah, wow. Mm-hmm.
And then I came to Auckland and I found out I was brown.
Yeah.
I thought we were rich living in Ahipara because we had power every day. And then I went to live in New Zealand and I found out not only was I brown, I was poor.
Right. Yeah.
So all of that stuff kind of gurgles around in you, and it impacted. But it was really not until I went to university in my 30s that I was able to understand critically the way society is structured to make people have certain types of experiences. And it's not just you that is the problem in your life.
Yeah.
That was very galvanizing for me and highly politicizing, in my 30s. I'd just like to say that I had a very long adolescence because I just, from when I hit the streets at 15 till I went to university at 30, I was just a bum. And then that fabulous program they had at Auckland University, the New Start program, which is basically code for old women coming to university.
Right.
And
Fantastic.
I met these fabulous, staunch women, and they transformed my way of seeing the world. And that was 1986, 35 years ago.
Right, okay. You feel that you're doing that now for other younger women?
I hope so. I'd like to think I am. I'd
say
that
so,
the good and great women who helped shape my thinking about what is a career, what is a profession, how do you teach, how do you contribute to the world. All of those people have percolated into me, and I hope translate into how I work and interact with particularly women, particularly Maori, particularly younger folk, to infuse them with some of the things that got me motivated and enthused and passionate.
Fantastic.
Because
Great.
at the end of the day, a career is nothing more than your passion turned into what you do during the day, if you're very lucky.
This is very interesting. My husband has just quit his job of 29 years, the profession, because he has no passion and no joy. So I'll play him just that little soundbite there. I think that would be good for him. Absolutely. So now one question I've asked everybody, which has led on very many directions, but is that what has been your relationship with your body like through your life and the journeys that it's been on?
Well, it's an interesting thing, I mean, it's I don't know anybody, even now, young women who think, unless it's body trauma, I want to be skinnier or blah, 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 or I want to be a different color, or I want to be taller, or I want to have blonde hair, all of which you can pretty much do these days. I mean, I literally didn't even know I had a body until it started collapsing on me.
Right. So you've never judged it or anything like that?
Well, it just was very functional and useful.
Right. It gave you children, etc.
Well, that came much later. I mean, in the years when I was traveling, in my 20s, I spent a lot of time working on boats and traveling. I was fit. I was cut.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much anymore, but it was just a workhorse that allowed you to work hard, play hard, go wherever you want. And wasn't really until I had my first child, and I had Jocelyn when I was 31, so I was older than many other women back in the 80s.
At the time, yeah.
All my sisters were mothers by the time they were 18. I had 3 sisters. They were all mothers at 18.
Right.
Because they were pregnant at 17, and they all got married and stayed married for 50 years, and they were all grandmothers before they were 40.
Wow.
And they were all great-grandmothers before they were 60. So that was life.
Wow.
I had my last daughter at 41, and my sister, the eldest one, who we lost a few years back, looked at me when she found out I was pregnant at 41. She said, "Shit, are you still doing it?" And I said, "Well, obviously."
Obviously. Right. And thank you very much. I see. Right. Okay, good. Well, that's good because, I had so much loathing of mine at a young age and all that sort of stuff. So it's fantastic that you skipped all that.
I just didn't have the energy, but I think it did have a lot to do with being out in the world and traveling. I think if I'd stayed in New Zealand in the 1970s, and the 70s was a wild time around the world. There was a lot going on musically. I think it was great. There was a lot of wild new ideas, and then there was the 80s, and I look back at the 80s and what we look like, and quite frankly, it's a miracle any of us got boyfriends. Look at the hair. And then we had those dowdy brown dresses that went down to our ankles. We all looked like Amish refugees. We got electric shocks and made our hair go weird. I mean, it was such a reaction to the 70s and the 60s. And then, of course, towards the end, we all got power suits and had champagne lunches at SPQR, So,
right. Were you doing that?
Oh, of course.
I like that you said if you remember the 70s, you weren't doing it properly or something.
No. The 70s I forget, but with a smile. The 80s, I was as frumpy as everybody else until I discovered power suits in the late 80s.
And then did you watch Gloss, the 80s?
Oh my God, I loved it.
I love Gloss too.
I loved it, yes, absolutely.
I was 13 when Gloss came out, and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks like a fun time, yes.
So, yeah, the 80s were really interesting. They were transformative politically for me, and I think for the country. I know it's very easy because I am very negative about the political economy at the time, but it was also an opening up of the country in a way that would not have happened, I think, without those economic reforms,
Oh, right, okay.
I mean, the fact that you had to have a license to buy margarine in 1983
What?
because we were protecting the dairy industry.
I did not know that.
If you wanted to buy margarine prior to the economic reforms, you had to get a license.
And people are complaining about getting a vaccine passport.
Exactly.
Get a license.
So, well, it was because everything was about protectionism and protecting our dairy industry, and
tariffs
and so on and so forth. And so there was definitely the need for change, but I just think that neoliberal shift, we are still feeling the really negative consequences of. And I think that they have fundamentally changed this country in not necessarily the best way. But having said that, I've spent enough time travelling, particularly in the last 25 years through my work, to know that we're still pretty special.
Right, yeah.
As a country.
Yeah.
There's things we get occasionally really wrong, but by God, there's so much we get right.
Fantastic. Yes, and I think that's very sad that people get so angry. They lose sight of how fortunate we are to be from Aotearoa and be here. Yeah.
We've had tough conversations that other countries in the world are only just thinking might be necessary or useful or interesting. And that's not just around Maori issues and treaty issues. It's around gender issues. It's around the role of women. It's around how many strong women we have. It's around protecting our environment and having, stewardship and kaitiakitanga woven into environmental protection laws. It's around having our nuclear-free stance, no matter which side of the political divide you're on. That we are clear on. So these are things that I have a great sense of pride about when I go out into the world, if I am ever able to do that again.
Absolutely. Right. So now we're going to get to the questions at hand. You talked about your body falling apart.
Yeah.
So literally, absolutely. So we'll get to menopause. So did you know anything about menopause before it came knocking on your door?
No, and I'm ashamed to say this, but it was an incredibly speedy and painless process.
Right.
So what am I? I'm 67 now. I had my last period of 52, so that was 15 years ago. And then I didn't have another period. I think I may have sometime around 53 had a genuine hot flush experience where I literally had to lie down for the day and I was covered in sweat. And that was it. One hot flush And that was it. I was done. I was very, very, very fortunate because I've had...
Oh my God. So that's all you had? You didn't have any sort of imbalances?
I mean, I was a grumpy bitch before. I'm a grumpy bitch now. So there was no change in my character. It's the same old, same old. But I had friends who had horrific experiences.
Oh, really? In what way?
Oh, hot flashes, emotional turmoil, a lot of grief, a lot of terrible, painful ending periods that went on for days, if not weeks.
Yeah, right.
So I know I got off quite lightly compared
Absolutely,
to what other people had experienced. But I mean, menopause itself was not so much a catalyst for my thinking about this, talking to you, but also about the experience. But as I learned more about my culture and my identity as a Maori woman, I realized that in traditional pre-colonial society, one of the most powerful places you could be was a post-menopausal woman.
Oh, right.
Because in traditional society, they were the ones who would do the karanga. Because part of the karanga, and a lot of this is gone because we have young people doing it now and young men doing whai kōrero, but part of the karanga was that not only would the queer, the elder, call the visitors, but they would also call the dead.
Oh, right. Okay.
So implicit in that first call is our ancestors. Our ancestors and your ancestors will meet on the marae ātea, that space outside of where we're gathering.
Mm-hmm.
And our ancestors will gather. So you are literally calling up the dead. And so women who were still of childbearing age should not have done that job, or if they did, they would stand behind the queer to protect their wombs.
Right.
From negative energy, but in case any of the ancestors from the other side wanted to do bad things, right? And then, of course, when the men spoke, because these were complementary roles, the women would call and the men would greet the dead and say, thank you for blessing us with your presence. Now go so we can talk.
Right, okay.
So a woman in her post-menopausal time had extraordinary social and political power in traditional society, none of which is true now, of course, except unless you know some of the older Māori women that I know, you would know that that is still true. You look at the women, many of whom have gone on to become presidents of the Māori Women's Welfare League, who have got damehoods, right? Whina Cooper would just go down to Wellington and walk in. That's it. Muldoon, got a meeting. They called them the dames when they went down to talk about kāinga ora only last year or the year before. Got a meeting with Jacinda Ardern, PAs had said, you've got 20 minutes. Well, 4 hours later, they came out of a meeting with her. So there are these extraordinary older women.
They just have this immense mana, I guess, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah. It's not anything that they would say to describe themselves, but there's a sort of fearlessness that comes when you know you're past your childbearing years, children are grown, they can look after yourself. You can then devote yourself to the well-being of the community because your family is well and taken care of, and you get to enjoy them more because you don't have the day-to-day jobs with them. So you're able to devote yourself to the well-being of the community. And that is the reason I know why there are so many women, older women, in prominent roles in tribes all over the country and in Māori organisations. You just need to look at them. And so I trace that back to the last remnants of that of our traditional society where we had a certain type of political and social power that came with being queer, elders, post-menopausal. In many ways, the menopause was simply a physical manifestation of the move from being a woman to being an elder.
Right. What was the Māori life expectancy like before colonialism?
When Cook and them arrived back in the 1760s, keep in mind that the life expectancy in Europe at that stage was very, very low. So they were seeing an inordinate number of quite elderly Māori. So clearly whatever we were doing was working for us. By comparison to what was happening in Europe, obviously that changed quite radically as we lost our lands and our economic potential and became impoverished. And you see the kind of health problems that Māori experience today are a vestige of those radical changes that occurred 200 years ago.
And that's so interesting too, because often age is not as revered in Western cultures, and women were dying not long after they were menopausal then because the life expectancy was lower, whereas in Māori culture they'd be more revered and potentially living longer.
Look, I say to my friends, as I said, I'm plummeting towards 70 and so is my social circle. And I say to my mates who are Pākehā, I go, oh, you poor things.
No one gives a shit.
My culture will just turn you into a little old lady. I come from a culture which has turned me into a mean bitch. I love it.
I don't, particularly because I was like, menopause is so often associated with being extremely old, which it just clearly isn't.
Not true.
Yeah, not true at all. Yeah, you don't look like you're lacking in energy. Do you find that you're lacking in energy now? Like, did you?
I have rheumatoid arthritis, which does slow me down. So I am a human barometer. I have become that little old lady that goes, "It's going to rain tomorrow."
I can feel it in my waters, literally.
I can feel it in my waters. In fact, only yesterday, I woke up creaky. I was going, "It's going to rain tomorrow." And my daughter said, "Yeah, I know. We've already watched the news."
Yeah. You're like, you don't need to watch that. Just ask me. Right. So, yeah, because that's the thing. After you stop having estrogen, various things can happen. And so do you think you've felt the effects of that?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of is what it is. Your body is not your friend after a certain point in your life.
When do you think that is? Do you have any?
Well, I mean, look, I know people who are hale and hearty in their 70s and 80s. So I don't think there's a point in time where you say it. But you wake up knowing you are not the same as you were 15, 20 years ago. I get up in the morning and I creak.
Right.
After a minute or two of moving around, I'm ready for the day. And who knows, that creak may take longer to be gone as I go further. And I say this as somebody, so I'm one of 8 siblings, and I've lost all of my siblings. I was the baby, so they're all gone.
Oh, God. Right. Okay.
In my family, the oldest of any of my siblings have lasted to is 76, sorry.
Right.
So that's only 9 years away. So I've got maybe 9 years left if I have the same life expectancy that they do.
Right.
So, God damn it, I'm going to enjoy those 9 years as much as I possibly can.
I find this really interesting to think about, like, because I'm 47 and I don't feel that I'm old, but I know when I was 20, I thought 47 was so old.
Oh, my God, I thought 30 was old.
Like, do you ever get to a point where you just feel old?
All the time.
Right.
And what's interesting is physically, I know that I'm not as fit as I was. I was very fortunate to have a fit life. Right. I worked a couple of ski seasons in the French Alps. I don't know if you know skiing, but I learned to ski a black slope, right?
Right.
In bikinis. Now you have measures. So green is the baby one, blue is sort of, mum, dad and the kids, red is hot, black is I'm a killer.
And in a bikini, did you say?
Bikini tops. We used to ski down the black slopes in bikini tops. And so we go from 1850, Courchevel 1850, which was 1850, down to 1350 in our bikini tops.
Wow.
And we're just skiing down the Val Thorens black slope and then just drink all afternoon and get taken back up the hill in time to cook dinner for a bunch of very equally drunk people who were staying at the hotel we cooked at.
Right, this is rock and roll indeed. Very rock and roll. I'm just also can think about this is very inappropriate, but it's just some very pert nipples flying down the sky.
Exactly. Can you imagine? There were 7 or 8 of us, who would just do this for fun. The young women who worked there, they were chalet girls.
Yes.
I used to work with Sloane Rangers.
Yes, indeed. Look at that. It was like Charlie's Angels, or James Bond.
Absolutely. We had to do everything in a bikini top, So it was 1982.
Right.
And Diana was the princess.
Yes, indeed.
A lot of these girls had gone to the same schools as her and they were doing their winter season of the chalet in the French Alps. And I was the colonial who made them laugh. So
yeah. Right.
We used to get up to high jinks.
Darling. So this body has given you all this stuff that you've loved, but now you're feeling it a bit now.
I'm paying my dues. I did damage to my knees. I did damage to my elbows working on fishing boats. So I'm paying for not taking better care of my body in my 20s. Mm-hmm. But you know what? The payoff to me was the great memories I have. So,
absolutely, yeah.
So I could have been a much more cautious person, but I would have had a less interesting life.
Yes, indeed. I'll just go back a bit too. Did your mother ever talk to you about her menopause or menopause at all?
My mother didn't talk about sex.
Right.
She was born in 1919.
Yeah.
She used to tell me stories, though, because she grew up in the gum fields and she was one of 13. And her father and mother worked in the gum fields. And this is like from the 1890s through to the 1920s. 30 years, that's how they made a living. And they just had a bunch of kids on the back of the horse and cart. And so my grandmother would just stop and have a baby and whoever was the oldest girl would help.
Wow.
And then get back on and then ride on to the next town. So when I had a child with this man and we had a disagreement and baby she's like 30 now, so she was about 2. And I packed up everything and I went to my mum's and I said, that's it, I've had it with him. And mum went, oh, you poor thing, what's going on? And I said, I just can't take it any longer. She said, does he beat you? And I went, no, of course not. She went, well, what's your problem?
Right. She's just respecting me. But yeah, okay.
I said, we just can't communicate. And she went, oh, for fuck's sake.
So yeah, she's just digging for kauri gum. That's kauri gum, right? Yeah.
Kauri gum to make a living, a miserable pittance. So she just thought I was a spoiled brat.
Right. Yes. So she didn't. Do you know how her menopause was? Like, did she talk about it with you?
I know that probably about the time it happened, she also got breast cancer in her mid-50s.
Ah, right.
This was about the time that she got through that, but it had been hard. And I came home just when she turned about 60, and we lived together after that until I went off and kind of made my own way in the world. So even then, she did not come from a time in history where women talked about women's troubles.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, no, we never had conversations about any of that stuff.
But do you with your daughters?
Oh, yeah, no, God, yeah. No, they all threatened to leave home because I wanted to have menstruation parties for them. Yeah. Look, I was right into my witch moon phase when my first one got her period. And I said, oh, we're going to have a midnight feast and all dance around. She said, no, we're not, Mum. And if you invite any of your crazy friends over for my first period, I'm leaving the house.
Right, but yes, but it's so good that you do talk to them. My mum was really good at talking to me about what to expect. And it just makes such a difference that you're not like, why is there blood coming out of my wazoo?
Yeah,
and I have no idea.
I wanted my girls to, probably because I was the youngest of a big family and we didn't talk about real stuff. But then I had a different upbringing and a completely different life to my sisters and my brothers. I wanted to make sure that, and I had children later, that we were able to talk about stuff, about everything. And I hope that still continues. I mean, the fact that we're still friends, I think, now.
There's just one of them living with you, right? So that's good.
I've got two of them living with me.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
And they all work in the film industry and they all live crazy lives that are associated with working in the industry because their dad was a camera op and a director, and they grew up around filmies, techos, and creative people, and all their lives I wanted them to be surrounded by intelligent, caring, sensitive people. Once we were visiting a distant cousin of theirs, and I think their eldest was 12, so the baby would have only been about 5, and they saw a child being hit.
Oh, right.
I mean, it wasn't like a beating, but it was a hitting, because I had my nieces and, my cousins, they just had people. That was normal. That was how you grew up. And because they'd never had me lay a hand on them or anybody, they were so shocked. They were actually traumatized. And I'd like to think that there's a whole generation of New Zealanders that have grown up thinking the idea of hitting a teeny tiny little human being is unacceptable.
Absolutely.
I'd like to think that legislation is actually percolating down. I mean, I grew up at a time when there were no seatbelts. You'd go to the doctor and he'd be puffing on a fag. And everybody drove drunk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do think legislating for morality is not a bad thing. And now that they're all grown up and bigger than me, my children say, Mum, you are much more vicious with your tongue.
Sticks and stones break my bones.
True. In fact, my little girl, who's 30 now, says, you scared away so many men, young men, because you are a monster.
You're like, but I told you about your period, so you're a lucky lady. And have they been at all interested in menopause yet? Probably not.
No, but then, Joss was 35 when she had a child.
Right.
She has worked in wardrobe for 15 years and she's loved her career. It's taken her around the world. She's worked on very big productions and loves her job, but her and her partner it was the time. They were both ready. So isn't that lovely that they're having a baby that was loved and thought through and they're ready, and hopefully that's reflected in the happiness that surrounds him,
Absolutely. That's really nice. Back to the whole menopause thing, and you were saying that your friends have had some bad times. So have you got like groups of friends who've talked about it and that sort of thing?
Yeah. My social circle of women friends tends to be highly articulate, well-educated, professional, successful women
Mm-hmm.
who are in academia and in film and television production and politics, all sorts of prominent positions. We just happen to have known each other for 30 years and have gone through the study time together, so we're besties. And in fact, I look at my friends now and I go, oh my God, 70's the new 55. Look at you, you're so foxy. 50 is the new 35, for God's sake. When I was growing up, a 50-year-old woman was old. 25 years ago, a 50-year-old woman in her mind was an old woman. You look around now at the 50-year-old, the foxy 50-year-olds who look fabulous, who are opinionated and staunch, and I'm like, yeah, you go, sister. And then there's us in our late 60s who are like, don't mess with me, kiddo. So these women, we talk about everything. We have occasionally what we like to call wine and wine nights. Which translate well to Zoom, actually. You can have a wine and a wine. And overwhelmingly, our wines are just bitching and kvetching about our menfolk and all, politics and all the blah blahs. So, of course, we talk about everything to do with our bodies, our lives, probably share far too much. But we don't care because it works for us.
Yeah, I'd like to be a fly on the wall of that discussion. I think that would be very entertaining.
Oh, look, it's fabulous. And so, yeah, we've been very open and candid with each other about, sometimes I look at my friends and we've literally been through the 4 weddings and a funeral, if you know what I mean, except for us now it's 4 funerals and a wedding.
That's one thing that definitely changes.
And so I do know that some of us have had a much harder time, had to use HRT, gone off and done yoga weekends because yoga is really, really good apparently for extreme abdominal pain.
Oh, okay.
Hormone replacement therapy at a pinch, but there are lots of things like, St. John's wort and oat straw tea. So we know all of the things, the checklist of, have you tried this if you're having trouble? The fact that none of us have had that conversation for over 10 years because we're all kind of past them. By your mid-50s, it's done. Still having trouble in your late 50s, then I think you need help.
Yeah. And did you feel like, because I've talked to some women, even though yours wasn't so bad, that once it was finished, then they got this renewed vigor? So did you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right, absolutely.
Quite apart from anything else, back in those days, you saved a fortune on pads and, pads and plugs. I mean, God, when you add up how much that cost you over a year, that's a holiday in Rārawa.
Yes, right. For swimming, it's a lot easier and things like that when you're in Rārawa. Absolutely. Is retirement something that interests you?
I think retirement's a bit of a bourgeois notion myself. I mean, I come from a family where everybody worked till they died.
Right.
But then they died quite young. So
I shouldn't be laughing. Oh.
No, because, my sisters worked in the kinds of jobs where they got told you have to stop work at a certain age, but then they did community work and were involved with the marae and ran a whole bunch of stuff and were heavily involved in the whānau hapuiwi stuff. So I don't imagine myself not working.
I don't know you that well, but I feel like I can't imagine you not working either.
I would have to be in some kind of traction and physically incapable of doing anything.
And then you might retire.
And then I might be put in a corner, with very active eyebrows.
Right, you could dictate your novel from that
point. I know, like that guy with the butterflies in Belgium.
Okay, so so you will be actively running around like a pocket rocket until you have to fall into the
I'd like to think so. I've still got more work to do teaching. I'm very excited. We're developing a new Maori business minor at AUT in the business school, which I've been driving for the last couple of years. I'm excited about that. I'll probably apply for full professorship at some stage because that's what one does, and there's just too much to do.
Fantastic. Great. Fabulous. Well, I think that's probably quite a good place to end. But now, did you manage to come up with a fun fact at all?
Yeah, the worst thing about teaching is your whole life is fact.
Right. And none of it's fun?
It's like an oxymoron. Fun fact.
Right.
Fun fact. My head is just full of facts and none of them are fun. They're all about changing the world and making it a better place. So I guess what would be a fun fact? Oh, I know. And it's sort of related to menopause. Okay. So some people may not find this fun, but I think it's fun. I was I presented evidence at the Manawahine claim, which is the treaty claim laid by a bunch of Māori women in 1992, which argues that when we signed the treaty, women lost their mana.
Right.
which I did my master's thesis on Māori women in leadership 25 years ago, and I came to the same conclusion, that prior to the treaty, we had mana. We had equal power. Men and women's voices were equally powerful. The land owned us. We didn't own the land. I come from a tribe named for a woman, not a man. So there's lots of evidence that women were equals in many ways, and that went away when we were colonised by patriarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
When we signed the treaty in 1840 and became British citizens, it was at a time when British women were chattels.
Yep.
In law.
Yep.
They were literally the property of their fathers until they were given away in marriage to a man who they became the property of, and their children were his property, not hers.
Fucking bullshit. Fucking bullshit.
Climbing through that, fun fact, one of the bits of evidence I used, because our men have done very well out of patriarchy. A lot of Māori men have done quite, they've done okay.
Okay.
So part of the evidence I was giving was about how I had found the value of a woman was embedded in ancient practices. Now, in ancient knowledge, mātauranga, every part of the body has a god, an atua, a guardian spirit. The eyes, the eyebrows, the head, the brain. Women's vaginas have 3 gods.
Wowzers. She's just got a very sultry expression at the camera.
Fun fact, 3 gods for a vagina. How's that for a fun fact?
And how does that matter? What do they do?
Vaginas have multiple functions. One, the guardian of creating life, the portal for new life. The other for waste management, a quite different job, and the other for pleasure.
Waste management. We'll just dispose of that uterus. Right, okay. Do you know the names of them? I want to know the names of them.
I can't remember them, but they're written down in my evidence to the Waitangi Tribunal. What was really interesting is I was sitting next to an elder who's my age, but anyway, and he'd been on giving evidence before me, and we all got 20 minutes. He took 2 hours.
Oh, my God.
He was one of those blokes, just opens his mouth and thinks that everything is golden. And so every time I said vagina in my evidence, he went,
oh, winced. He came out of one. He's not allowed. He's not allowed.
Vagina.
Vagina. People that get so about that, and it's like you just came out of one, so shut up. Yes, right. Okay.
Exactly.
Yes.
Hello.
So you managed to say that quite a lot.
It's written evidence in the Waitangi Tribunal evidence court, evidence forever.
Right. I think that is a fun fact. Excellent. Very good. Well, hooray.
Well, might be associated with menopause.
Yes. Well, that's the waste management part. A waste management and then shuts up shop and retires.
Right. And then you're just left with pleasure.
Yes, dude. Yes, 3 gods focusing on. Yes, that is very exciting. Jennifer taught me some words around the te reo words, like that whenua is placenta, and just these lovely poetic images.
But all of it, this whole notion of birth and life and the role that women play in our bodies is so woven into our spirituality, our cosmology, our belief system. You can't believe for one moment that is also a place where we're discriminated against and diminished.
Right. Before the patriarchy came and fucked it all up.
The patriarchy came.
On that note, fuck the patriarchy. I think that's a good way to end. Well, thank you so much for being fabulous and entertaining and knowledgeable and clever and all those sorts of things. It's lovely to see your face. Enjoy your moko. Have a lovely time.
It's going to catch up right now. Take care.
Fabulous. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye.
So that was the fabulous and fierce Dr. Ella Henry, who I have to thank or give a big ngāmihi thank you to being so entertaining, even though I did have to turn down the volume on a lot of my cackles as I edited this one together. I thought I'd give you a little bit of a glossary, some of the te reo Māori terms for those of you who are listening outside of New Zealand, which I believe there is 1 or 2 of you. Kia ora, hello. So first of all, the marae, which is the meeting ground. It's the focal point of Māori communities throughout New Zealand. A marae is a fenced-in complex of carved buildings and grounds that belongs to a particular iwi, tribe, hapu, sub-tribe, or whānau, family. Māori people see their marae as their tūranga waiwai, their place to stand and belong. Also, she mentioned the kāranga. So the kāranga is an exchange of calls that takes place during the time a visiting group moves onto the marae or into the formal meeting area. The kāranga usually indicates the start of a pōwhiri, which is a formal welcome ceremony, carried out almost exclusively by women and in the Māori language. Karanga are initiated by the hosts. Also moko, which means grandchildren. Not to be confused with tā moko, which is the facial tattoos that you'll see on Māori. In fact, on our current Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nanaia Mahuta, she has the female tā moko, which is the lower part of the face. And it's quite fabulous that she's out there in the world showcasing Māori culture. So thank you very much for listening. Ngā mihi. I just ask you could share this podcast. It's been getting lots of great traction. It'd be lovely to get a bit more out there and around so people can have an understanding. I've just been really interested in the different varieties of menopause. For example, Ella's is so fleeting, but she knew people that had so much more suffering, and just the broad spectrum of what we can or can't expect. I just think it's really good to know about all of it. I have enjoyed your nice messages, so do get in touch. I think I've got about 4 or 5 more episodes in me for this season. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to do a second season or not. So yeah, feel free to get in touch and encourage me. I have got coming up Michelle A. Court. I'm interviewing her today. I'm also interviewing Carolyn Harris, who is a Welsh MP who is leading the, quote, menopause revolution in the UK. I'm talking to her at 10 o'clock tonight. I've also got Jane Caro, quite a well-known Australian feminist, coming up, Judith Tizard, and Louisa Wall. Not too many national MPs, but, you know, it's just how it's worked out. You can draw your own conclusions from that, you know. Oh, I do have to apologise for a bit of the sound quality in that. I'm particularly sad that you couldn't really hear Alice say, "Fuck the patriarchy," which she did at the end. Quite sweary episode. Not as sweary as George's, but up there. Please do visit my Patreon if you would like to. I am with Omicron. God knows when anything's getting back to normal, but nobody knows, and that's the point. Looking for certainty is futile. But thanks very much for listening. I've been Penny Ashton, and these are Showy Ovaries. Stay juicy, everyone. Ka kite.